Basis for race is that there is only one race. Do we then not perpetuate this idea of different levels of superiority and so on by continuing to talk about race instead of talking about aspects of ethnicity and culture, even the phenotypical features of an individual? Because by the very nature that we talk about race, we perpetuate that idea that one group of people is superior to another. And as what I'm saying is, as believers in Christ, as Christians, we are the only ones who will ever talk about the fact that there is only one race, because we're the ones with the biblical understanding, as it were. So that's my question.
That's a really good question. Can I just say something? Is there another question before I get into it? Okay.
Just over here.
So before you ask the question, do you want to respond to that?
What I would really love to see in Christendom is a campaign where we actually stop using those terms black and white, because the moment you use those terms, the one that is white knows that it's up there. The one that is black, there's this, I don't know if you know the power of branding. Companies spend millions to brand a product. And I think the way those two things are being branded, I was in a conference last week, and somebody was talking about how he saw this black, big, evil thing, and suddenly there are things we've associated with black, and there are other things. For me, like I said, I'm learning not to use those two words. There are things like Caucasians, Africans, Asians, Caribbeans, Latinos, and all of that. Because sociologists or whoever, those who are making money out of all of this, would love that term to continue to be. So for me, I would want to complain. But again, we've got to talk about race. The evil of it. We've got to talk about it.
I was going to my question, my answer would be slightly different to that, in that that's what people recognize. So you've always got to start where people are. And I think as a community of believers, as Christians, certainly, what we need to do is to start the discussion, always anchoring it in the theology of why we believe this doesn't matter. Now, we're going to talk about colour blindness in a moment, but it would be really interesting to start there. So I agree, but to get here to talk about one race, to talk about there's just one race, would seem to obliviate the problem and to lose it in almost like an overall blanket statement that doesn't take into account the experiences that people of colour, black, brown, other people of colour have also gone through. So because we're using a term, although we perhaps don't like it, we're anchoring it in something that people talk about, but also as Christians to show a different perspective about how we operate, so we demonstrate what it is that we're talking about. That's where I come from on that. There's a second question.
Thank you. Just to add to that, my personal experience when I came to this country, we went to church. I already mentioned, but just to give you a principle, we're trying to find a church because we are Christians, and went to a church not knowing what group of people meet in London somewhere, and so met us at the door. The usher said, "Oh, I think you benefit more if you came for the afternoon service. Then you meet more people like you," referring to people of African ethnicity, because the morning one was non-Africans. I'll put it that way. And so I'll bring it to the church, the importance of having, and my experience is that we call the church, we have been using the term Black African Church. Have you heard that before? We've used that terminology. And sometimes, even if the pastor is not Black in that respect, quote unquote, I don't call myself black anyway, but in the context we are using it. And I thank God for the past few, decades or so, our senior ministers are not African. Otherwise, my church would have been referred to as Black African Church without looking at the gospel. So we start, as I say, talk about it, but let's start from the church, referring to, and I'll land here, one of the ministers I spoke to, he said, oh, but yes, I know, but you people call yourselves black. We call ourselves black. And James Brown was saying, not that I follow him, say it loud, I'm black and proud. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comment. I think the experience of many of certainly my parents' generation, is that when they first came to the UK, they no longer perhaps not as welcome as they could have been, which is why they led to setting up of other churches really. So I think it's time for us to think about how do we start looking at the problem. Now in 2020, many of you know about the murder, the killing of George Floyd. And that started a tsunami of discussions and conversations about race, redirecting that all around the world. In fact, it was one of the incidents that precipitated me going to my first ever march because I was so angry about what had happened. I felt, perhaps as a generation of people who was born in the 60s, had come over, the first generation of my parents being here, I felt that I'd assimilated quite well. I'd done well out of the education system, etc. But to see that someone in another nation was being killed simply because of their colour, and it was done on TV, can any of you remember the horror of that? That precipitated a movement that meant that we started to talk about race, and that started as well, not only in a secular world setting, but also in our churches. And so I think it's time for us to talk about race. And so I'm going to ask you just to discuss in your table, just for a minute, why do you think it's important for the church to talk about race? So it's not just something that we latch onto as something that's happening out there and therefore we're built a thing. When we talk about it, why do you think it's important for the church, global as well as micro, and talking about freedom, what is important for us about race? Just for a minute, come with your suggestion as well. Why is it important for the church to talk about race? It'd be really great to hear a couple of comments, if that's okay. A couple of answers to that question. We've got right at the back there. Oh, we've got, so just have that. Can we turn the microphone?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I was saying to Jonathan Catherine, you belong to one body, and you agree with your initial opening statement, we are the human race, God created one race. Well, actually, the reality is, even within church, often this gentleman's experience, but even today, we look at the end of the service, and everyone's extremely friendly with each other, normally, and they'll say hi, they leave it hard. At the end of the service, you just see all the cliques separating. So my interest in coming to the seminar, why do barriers exist and why are the barriers still existing? And so if we are going to perpetuate the message, actually God created one race, one human race, and that actually we're one body, then we need to address it within our own communities.
Absolutely, thank you so much. This is why we're having this seminar with Data.
So my question is, if you put racism as a title, so many things spin off from it, yeah? For me, racism is many fires that we're trying to put out. So my question is, what is the problem that we're trying to fix here? Is there one problem? Is there lots of problems? I come from this, as you know, with a project manager, nurse. And so if we're thinking about an improvement methodology, we improve one thing at a time to see that things have changed. Okay? I don't need fixing. Okay? I'm whole. Okay? I don't need fixing. I worked for the NHS for maybe 3 years. And yes, I face racism, but I face it as a profound one. And when I walk into it, I walk the talk. Yeah. So my question is, what are we trying to fix? Because here, I think we're preaching 30 lessons, bring to standard instead of 30. We're preaching to the converted. So what is the problem?
So one of the things, one of the questions we're talking about, the problem is races are treated differently. Some people of colour are treated much differently than other people of colour. So the problem we're trying to fix is how can we as a church help to model the behaviour that treats all as one? It's all right to sing lovely songs around Eurovision and wherever we sing them about, you know, all being one, and we have lovely videos in slow motion of all the races coming together, and it's lovely. But we know for many of us, and for many of us who've experienced, we talked about what racism is like, we're going to talk a little bit about colour blindness, that sort of thing, that racism is very real, as my sister was saying here. It's a very real experience that not only we face today, but also our children face. And we've been talking about this for hundreds of years. So there is a problem to be fixed, and that's probably, we're recognising that. And I'm not quite sure if everyone's and preaches the converted so much, but we need to talk about it. And so the question is, why do we need to talk about it? I think we've got two, yeah, we've got, okay. So just have those last three, and then we'll just move on. There's one, this gentleman from here, and then.
Okay, I think that the church needs to talk more about racism. The lady over there have said it. Actually, I don't feel the problem that needs to be fixed, but I just think that the church has got a better story to tell.
Absolutely.
And I think
Yes,
I
amen.
think that
Amen.
within the church, the fact that we're united by Christ,
Amen.
and actually that becomes like a level playing field for everybody. I think because of that, we need to show the world how actually communities can coexist with one another. And there can be differences, but those differences doesn't mean that one race is superior to another. So I think that the church is positioned to tell a better story. And that is why we need to talk about this.
That's a really
Yes.
good, really good point.
I think what I was saying, I mean, I was gonna come to that later, but there's another question. I think the big thing, there's a great commandment. We know the great commandment, don't we?
Yes.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Love your neighbors and love yourself.
Mm.
We can speak very well, and then we love those who are like us, but those who are not like us.
Mm.
It's love. And there's a text that says, how can we say we love God that we do not see? And then we say we don't love our neighbors we see. It says, the scripture says we are a liar. So I think for me, I like to root something in the Christian.
Yes.
You know, because that's what transforms the heart.
Really good point. Thank you. There were two more. Yes.
Yeah, mine was based on what you've just said, really, and I feel very sad in my heart that we need to have this conversation at this time. And one of the things that we said on our table is that, you know, we're called to be salt and light in the world, and we're in Lancaster. We're a very diverse population. And, you know, we love one another. I don't think if you spoke to any person of colour in our church that they would experience that in the place where we all worship. That's good. Probably out in the world, maybe. But together, as a body, we need to take the love that we feel one to another, and we need to take it out into the world. And you know, we need to, every journey starts with one step, and we're not going to fix it straight away. But we as a people of God have got to take these things out to the world, because we are one body, whatever the colour of our skin.
Thank you so much. And the last comment from there.
I think everybody has said what I wanted to say, so it's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.